The night deepened, and the first power line fell with a muffled groan. The house dimmed to the soft, uncertain glow of candlelight. With every fresh howl of the wind, my mother's eyes would dart toward the door. She gave me a small, brave smile. "It's all right, my love," she whispered. "Storms always pass." But beyond the walls, the world was already being erased. Snow fell without pause, a relentless, smothering blanket that would not lift for days. By the time evening should have arrived, there was no evening at all. The storm had swallowed the sun whole. Our little house trembled in its grasp. Old timbers creaked like the hull of a ship lost in a white sea. Snow beat against the windows, thick and fast. It piled and pressed until the glass seemed to breathe inward with the strain. Our single oil lamp cast a fragile golden halo on the walls. Shadows stretched and shifted, dancing to the wind's mournful song. Mother drew the heavy drapes closed, but we could still feel the storm's presence. It was a living thing. It roared one moment inside the next, as if deciding whether to lull us or test us. Every so often, a heavy thump would shake the roof. Then came the long, slithering sound of a snowslide finding its way down. I pulled my blanket tighter and edged closer to the iron stove. Inside, a small fire fought a quiet, determined battle. Flames danced in orange and gold, a defiant little heartbeat in the cold. The kettle on top gave a soft, intermittent whistle, a gentle promise. Even now there was tea. It was what? There was breath. Mother sat knitting by the firelight. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. The click of her needles was a steady, comforting rhythm. I asked when Father would be home. She paused, her eyes lifting to the darkened window as though she could see through it. "He'll wait it out somewhere safe," she said, her voice soft but tight. "Your father knows better than to fight a storm like this." But I heard the worries she tried to hide, a thin wire of tension strung beneath her words. She began to hum again. It was the same tune from the morning. That melody would become my most vivid memory of that winter. Not the wind's scream, not the bite of the cold, but the sound of her calm. As the hours stretched, the air in the room grew thinner, cooler. I curled up on the braided rug, close enough to feel the stove's warmth pulse through the floorboards. The lamp flame fluttered once, twice, and went out. Darkness wrapped around us completely, broken only by the faint red glow of the embers. "Go on to sleep now," Mother whispered. "Dream of spring. Dream of sunshine and the smell of grass." And as the storm raged outside, I drifted into uneasy dreams. Dreams of endless white fields, of my father's boots crunching through ice, of a world that had forgotten warmth entirely. I woke to a silence so deep it felt solid. That strange, heavy quiet that comes only after a storm has spent its fury. For a moment, I thought it was still night, but the light had a dim, silvery quality. The sun was a pale coin behind thick clouds, unable to break through. The house was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that seeped through blankets and walls alike. Mother was already moving, wrapped in her old gray shawl. She fed splinters of wood into the stove. The fire sputtered weakly, reluctant to catch. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. The windows caught my attention first. They were no longer transparent. Snow had pressed itself against the glass, smooth and solid, sculpting the outside world into vague white shapes. We were living inside a snow globe, shaken and then forgotten. "Morning, sweetheart," Mother said, her breath a small cloud in the air. "It's still blowing a little, but I think the worst is behind us." I went to the window and tried to scrape a clear patch with my fingernail. Even the inside surface was icy. My fingertips stung. Beyond the small circle I managed to clear, there was only white, a sheer wall of it. The fence, the trees, the porch railing all had vanished beneath a single, seamless drift. Somewhere out there the road was gone too. Mother boiled a little water and poured it over the last of our tea leaves. Steam rose like a gentle ghost in the stillness. We ate oatmeal again, slowly this time, as if savoring each bite could make it last longer. I asked when Father might come home. She hesitated. "Soon," she said. But her gaze was distant. "He knows how to find his way. He always does." I nodded, but something inside me felt unsteady. as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis and nothing was quite where it should be anymore. After breakfast, Mother pushed against the back door. It gave only an inch. Together, we took up the cold shovel and dug, carving a narrow tunnel of light into the frozen air. The cold outside was a sharp, shocking presence. It burned my cheeks and made my eyelashes stiff with frost. The world beyond our doorstep was unrecognizable. White hills rose where flat land had been. Mounds of snow swallowed the chicken coop whole. Fences were transformed into ghostly ridges. From somewhere far off came a faint sound, the muffled creak of a barn door perhaps, or just the shifting of ice. The stillness was so absolute that even the smallest noise seemed enormous. Mother stood beside me, her shawl fluttering lightly in the breeze. She whispered almost to herself, "It's as if the whole world has fallen asleep." In that moment, I believed her. Everything, the trees, the sky, even time itself felt suspended, caught between one heartbeat and the next. By afternoon, the faintest wash of blue had returned to the sky. A color so pale it was more a memory of blue than the thing itself. The storm had moved on, but it left behind a transformed world, buried beneath mountains of snow that had reshaped the very land. Nothing was where it should be. Paths that once led to neighbors' houses were now smooth, unbroken plains. Fences were swallowed whole, their tops showing like bones beneath white skin. Mother wrapped scarves around our faces and helped me into my thickest boots. The front door opened only halfway before meeting a solid wall of snow. She used the shovel again, this time with a quiet, determined rhythm that made me stay close. I scooped at the edges of her work with my small gloved hands. Each breath left a puff of mist in the freezing air. The sound of the world had changed. Muffled, soft, almost sacred. Every step crunched deeply. When we stopped, silence rushed in to fill the space, like a heartbeat holding its breath. We made it as far as the road. Or what should have been the road. It was gone. In its place was a great, rolling drift that stretched from one side of the valley to the other. Even the telephone poles were half-minus buried. Their wires sagged low, shimmering with a coat of frost. Somewhere a crow called out, a lonely, brittle sound that vanished almost as soon as it began. Mother turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. I could see the worry in her eyes now, as she tried to hide it behind her scarf. The nearest house was half a mile away. There was no sign of smoke from its chimney. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently. "We'll check on the neighbors tomorrow. It's too deep today." We trudged back toward the house, following our own footprints like breadcrumbs in a blank, white world. The snow reflected so much light was painful to look at. Bright, blinding, endless, felt smaller than I ever had before, like a single spark in a vast, frozen sea. Inside, the house felt quieter than ever. The stove was our sole guardian. Its flame, now steady and brave, fought against the chill pressing at the walls. Mother hung our coats near it to dry. She filled a pot with snow to melt for water. I watched as it hissed and disappeared into steam. A little warmth, a small victory in a land of ice. That night, we listened to the wind whisper softer stories against the window panes. Somewhere beneath all that snow, the earth waited, patient, unbroken. As I lay down to sleep, I pictured Father walking home through the drifts, his lantern glowing like a solitary star in the endless white. That night felt longer than any before it. The air in the house was thin and cold. The walls popped softly as the wood contracted in the freezing dark. I lay beneath layers of blankets listening. The faint crackle of the stove, the sighing of the wind outside. Every few minutes, the wind would rise again, a slow, mournful whistle around the eaves, to a lack of voice searching for someone who could answer. Mother did not sleep much. I could see her shadow moving across the floor, pacing softly near the window. Sometimes she would part the drapes just a little, peering out into the night. She was looking for something, for someone, though she never said it aloud. I stayed quiet, watching from beneath my blanket as she reached for the small oil lantern on the table. She lit it with careful hands, shielding the flame with her palm. The light was warm and golden, a tiny sun in our frozen world. She opened the door just long enough to set it outside on the snow-covered porch. "Just in case," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The light shone weakly through the swirling air. It barely cut through the white darkness. Snowflakes danced around it, landing softly on the glass and melting into clear drops that caught the flame's glow. From where I lay, I could see the faint shimmer through the window. A beacon, fragile but steady. I thought of my father. I imagined him out there somewhere, his boots sinking into deep drifts, the wind clawing at his coat, and that small light, her light, glowing faintly in the distance, calling him home. Time passed slowly, measured by the soft ticking of the wall clock, the occasional groan of the roof under its heavy load. The world felt suspended. Half dream, half waiting. I drifted between wakefulness and sleep. My mind painted quiet pictures. Father brushing snow from his beard, his breath fogging the air, his lantern swaying in rhythm with his footsteps. Then, sometime deep in the night, a sound broke the silence. Faint, unmistakable, a crunching of snow, deliberate, uneven, coming from the yard. Mother froze, her knitting needle mid-stitch. She went to the window, her breath fogging the glass. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, almost as if speaking to herself, she whispered, "Thank God." A figure was moving slowly toward the house. Lantern light glimmered beside him like a guiding star. Father had come home. When the latch finally lifted and the door creaked open, a gust of icy air rushed in. It swirled around us like the spirit of the storm itself. Father's breath caught in her throat, a soft gasp of relief and disbelief as Father stepped into the light. He was nearly unrecognizable beneath his coat and hat. A thick crust of snow clung to him. His eyebrows were white with frost. His cheeks rhined red. His hand shook slightly as he pulled off his gloves. For a long, silent moment, he simply stood there, blinking against the warmth and light, his chest heaving from the cold. Then Mother moved. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around him. She pressed her face against his chest, as though afraid he might vanish again. The lantern still flickered outside. Its flame shone faintly through the open door, casting golden light onto the snow beyond. Final witness to his return. Father smiled faintly when he saw me watching. "There you are, kiddo," he said. His voice was rough and low, but it carried that same steady warmth I remembered. "Did you keep the fire going for me?" I nodded, too relieved to speak. He gave a tired laugh and reached out. His gloved hand brushed my hair. "That's my boy," he whispered. He sank into the chair by the stove, while Mother helped him peel away the frozen layers of his coat. Steam rose from his shoulders as the warmth began to reach him. The smell of melting snow filled the room. Clean, sharp, oddly comforting. He told us pieces of what had happened. The roads had vanished under the storm within hours. The mill had shut down early, but half the men never made it home that night. He had taken shelter in a neighbor's barn, waiting for the winds to die down. Then he started walking before it died. The snow was higher than the fences in some places, he said, shaking his head slowly. "It's not a storm. It's a new world out there." Father served him a bowl of thin soup, warmed by what was left of our firewood. He ate in silence, his eyes soft and distant. Each spoonful seemed to thaw him a little more. Not just his body, something deeper inside. Later, when he finally rose to check the door, he brought the lantern back inside. He placed it gently on the table. The glass was fogged. The flame was small but still burning. "You left this out for me," he said quietly, turning to Mother. "I saw it from the ridge. It was the only light for miles." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Then it did its job. The wind had softened now, settling into low murmurs that brushed against the walls like a lullaby. The storm had broken, but the world outside was still locked in its white stillness. We sat together near the stove, the 3 of us, watching the lantern's flame tremble. Tiny, fragile, alive. That night, for the first time since the blizzard began, I slept without fear. Morning arrived in a hush that felt almost holy. The storm clouds had drifted east. They left behind a sky so blue it looked newly made, as if freshly painted by the cold. Sunlight glimmered on the snowdrifts. Each one sparkled like glass. For the first time in days, light poured into the house. Soft and golden, it caught on every surface. The kettle, the window latch, even the small frost flowers still clinging to the panes. I remember stepping to the window and feeling as though I were seeing the world for the very first time. It was breathtaking. Not in the grand, romantic way of stories, but in the quiet, impossible beauty of stillness. Nothing moved. Trees bowed under heavy snow, their branches frozen mid-minus gesture. The road, the fences, the hills all smoothed into a single, unbroken expanse. Father stood beside me, a mug of coffee in his hands. His face was lined with exhaustion and wonder. "You could walk for miles and not find where the road used to be," he murmured. Mother was already in motion, tending to the small fire, soiling the last of our potatoes. The smell drifted through the air, warm and earthy, a reminder that life continued even when the world had paused. After breakfast, Father went to clear a path to the shed. I watched through the window as he worked. His shovel sank deep into the white crust. Each movement sent up a glittering spray of powder. It caught the sunlight like dust from a broken star. He was strong, methodical, the same way he was at the mill. But even from inside, I could see the effort in every motion. Snow was deeper than his knees. The cold bit sharply at his face. Helped Mother hang a blanket across the doorway to keep the heat in. Then I went to stack the wood near the stove. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of metal, the crack of wood, the soft creak of the house as it settled into the cold. It was as if the whole world had learned to speak in whispers. By midday, Father had managed to reach the shed. He came back with a pail of grain and a determined look. "We'll check on the neighbors soon," he said. "But first, we take care of our own." Mother nodded. "We'll bake some bread. If they need help, we'll bring something warm." Outside, a single bird landed on the windowsill, a black minus-capped chickadee. Its tiny feet left perfect prints in the frost. It chirped once, sharp and bright, then vanished into the silence. That small sound felt like a promise. He signed that even in this frozen world, life would return. The day passed slowly. Time stretched thin between chores and small comforts. When dusk fell, the snow turned blue in the fading light. Shadows deepened like water. The first stars appeared, faint but steady above the white-knit earth. That night, as I lay beneath my quilt, I thought of how the world had stopped and started again. Quiet, fragile, changed. The storm had taken something, but it had also left behind a kind of peace. And in that peace, I heard my mother's soft voice humming the same tune as before, a lullaby for a world that had learned for now to rest. The next morning, Father said it was time to check on the neighbors. The storm had passed, but its heavy silence still lingered. We dressed in layers so thick, I could barely move my arms. Mother tied a scarf tightly around my face, tucking it carefully beneath my hat. Her hands lingered a moment, as if reluctant to let me go. "Stay close to your father," she said quietly. "Don't wander off, no matter what you see." The door opened with a low grang. The cold struck us like a physical wave. The snow outside was dazzling. So, why did it hurt to look at? The sky was a clear, crystalline blue. Sunlight made the field shimmer as though dusted with ground diamonds. But beneath that beauty lay something vast and still, a silence that made you feel profoundly small. Started walking toward the neighboring farm, about half a mile away. The drifts were high, up to Father's waist in places. He moved carefully, carving a narrow trail with his shovel. Snow squeaked under each step. I followed in his footprints, my boots sinking deep. The air was sharp in my lungs, clean, biting. The world looked utterly unfamiliar. Fences were swallowed whole. Rooftops had become gentle, white hills. Trees bowed low beneath thick mantles of snow. It was hard to believe there had ever been roads or fields here. Everything was one smooth, endless sheep. Halfway to the farm, we passed what had once been the old maple at the crossroads. Only its stout branches showed, black against the sky, like fingers reaching up from beneath the snow. A crow perched there, It called out once, then took flight. Its wings were startlingly loud in the frozen air. When we finally reached the neighbor's place, we found their barn half-minus buried. The doors were sealed shut by a thick drift. The house itself was quiet, but smoke rose faintly from the chimney, a thin, wavering ribbon of gray against the blue sky. Father knocked on the door with his gloved hand and called out. After a moment, the door opened a crack. Mrs. Hargreaves appeared, her face pale but smiling. "Good heavens, Tom," she breathed. "They didn't know if anyone made it through." Father stepped inside to help check on them. I followed close behind. The air inside was warmer, thick with the smell of kerosene and boiled potatoes. Their children were wrapped in blankets near the stove. Cheeks bang from the heat. It felt strange, this little island of warmth in a sea of ice. "We've got some flour left," Father said, setting down his pack, "and I brought a bit of grain for your chickens once we dig them out." Mrs. Hargreaves nodded, eyes shining. "You're a good man, Tom." I looked around the small room. Frost still clung to the corners of the windows. The walls glowed amber in the lamplight. Outside, the snow reflected so much brightness, it seemed almost alive, pressing gently against the glass. For the first time in days, laughter returned to the air. It was quiet, tentative, like something fragile rediscovering its strength. And when we left a short while later, the Hargreaves children waved from the doorway, bundled in scarves and mittens far too big for them. Father waved back, his breath fogging the air. As we made our way home through the vast white silence, I thought about that house, the warmth within it, and how even in the fiercest winter, people could still find ways to share what little light they had. By the time we made it back to our house, the afternoon light had begun to fade into a soft golden haze. The snow caught every bit of that light. It carried it in delicate sparks that seemed to drift just above the surface, as though the world itself was glowing. The air was so still that each sound felt sacred, suspended in crystal. Father paused halfway up the hill to catch his breath. Leaning on his shovel, he looked out across the valley. Farms and fields were buried beneath the same white blanket, and now seemed to connect everything. One vast, silent world. "Listen," he said quietly. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly from somewhere far off came the sound of bells. It was soft, so soft it might have been imagined. But as we stood there in the fading light, it grew clearer. Slow, gentle chimes carried by the wind, bringing from the direction of town. The sound was both haunting and hopeful, falling over the snow like the heartbeat of something unseen. "They're ringing the church bell," Father murmured. "Must be checking who's made it through." Though we listened for a while, the notes rose and fell across the wide expanse. The bell seemed to move with the wind, their echoes threading through the valley, sometimes close, sometimes far. It was the first real sound of life we'd heard since the storm, proof that beyond our small patch of survival the world still stirred. And when we reached home, Mother was waiting at the door, hike-spink from tending the fire. She smiled in relief when she saw us. "You found them?" she asked. Father nodded. "They're fine. Hungry, but fine." He hung his coat near the stove, shaking loose a small avalanche of snow. Town's still standing, too. I heard the bell. Mother's eyes softened. Then we're not alone. That evening, the wind returned. Not angry this time, but restless, wandering. It moved across the snow in long sighs, lifting small clouds of powder that danced like spirits beneath the moonlight. The house glowed with a fragile warmth, another baked bread from the last of our flour. The scent was rich and comforting. It filled every corner of the room. We ate slowly by lantern light. Father told quiet stories about his walk through the storm, about how the snow seemed to swallow sound, how even the stars had vanished from the sky that night. I listened, eyes half-minus closed, lulled by the rhythm of his voice and the cracking of the stove. Outside, the bells still faintly echoed, now distant, almost dreamlike. They mingled with the wind, blending into something soft and eternal. As the sound faded, I felt an odd peace settle deep inside me, a feeling that no matter how frozen the world became, they were part of something larger, something enduring. That night, I fell asleep to the memory of those bells, and music threading through the snow, calling the living back to life. The next morning, the sun rose weakly, casting long, pale shadows across the endless snow that stretched beyond our house. The world was quiet again, as though holding its breath. But the soft light revealed details that had been hidden during the storm. Frost clung to every surface, the branches of trees bent under icy weight. Fence posts poked up like jagged teeth from a smooth white field. The garden, once bursting with life, lay buried beneath a crystalline tomb. Father decided it was time to see what damage the storm had done to our small vegetable patch. I followed closely, my boots crunching in the hard minus-packed snow. Each step sank into the drift, leaving prints that would soon be swallowed by the wind. The garden gate was almost invisible, a faint shadow beneath the mound taller than me. Father reached for it, tugging until the snow shifted with a muffled roar. But when we stepped inside, the scale of the winter's power became clear. Every row was hidden under 6 feet of ice and snow. Tomato plants were bent and brittle, stems frozen solid. Lettuce had vanished entirely. Carrot tops that once peeked through the soil were gone, followed by white. Even the scarecrow had vanished, leaving only its post like a lonely sentinel. Here appeared at the gate with a small lantern, her breath forming clouds in the air. "Well, replant in spring," she said gently, brushing snow from her coat. "The garden will forgive us." Father nodded, stooping to pick up a frozen potato that had rolled from the shed. Its skin was cracked and hard, but beneath the frost, it still carried the faint scent of earth and sun. "Life holds on," he said softly, "even when it looks like nothing survives." I wandered through the drifts, running my hands over the crystalline snow. Every stalk, every twig was transformed, delicate, glittering, strange. The world had become both beautiful and unforgiving, like a dream you cannot wake from. We worked slowly that morning, clearing paths to the shed and moving supplies inside. The wind had softened, spring through the empty garden like a memory of summer. For a moment, the frost seemed alive, sparkling and fragile. I imagined the earth beneath it stirring, waiting for the warmth to return. By afternoon, the garden was still buried, but our paths were clear. We could walk without fear. And the house, warm and inviting, waited for us like a safe harbor. Mother set fresh bread on the table. Its smell mingled with the warmth of the stove. Father sank into a chair, tired but steady. I curled up nearby, listening to the small, steady noises of life returning. The hiss of the fire, the drip of melting snow, the soft hum of Mother's voice. Outside, the snow glistened like diamonds, unbroken and vast. Though the garden slept beneath its icy cover, I felt a sense of quiet hope. Winter had tested us. Yes, but life, small and stubborn, continued even here. The morning after we tended the garden, I woke to a world that seemed even quieter than before. The wind had softened to a gentle sigh, barely stirring the trees. Sunlight spilled across the snow, casting long, delicate shadows that shifted slowly, as if the day itself moved with caution. I pressed my nose to the window and noticed something new. Faint footprints in the drift, leading from the neighbor's property toward our house. Father noticed them too, leaning on his shovel as he squinted toward the path. "Looks like someone else made it through," he murmured. "Probably Mr. Landry. He lives a mile north." Mother wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. "Be careful," she said. "Even a short walk in the snow can be dangerous." I followed Father outside, boots crunching deep into the powder. The footprints were clear, but shallow in places, as though the traveler had struggled to lift their feet through drifts higher than knee-minus deep. Every step we took left our own trail behind, marking a path in a world that seemed to stretch on forever. The neighbor's house emerged slowly from the white, half-minus buried under mounds of snow. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, a comforting sign that warmth persisted in the frozen landscape. Mr. Landry stood at the gate, bundled in layers, his face red from the cold. He smiled when he saw us, waving with a gloved hand. "You made it out of your house too," he called. His voice carried softly across the drifts. "Thought I was alone here for a while." Father nodded. "We came to check on everyone. The storms left the world changed, but people are still walking through it. We stayed a little while, exchanging small supplies and stories of survival. Flour, potatoes, a loaf of bread shared between families. The air was crisp and biting, but it carried life. Laughter rose, muted but real, echoing across the frozen fields. When we returned home, our footprints traced a winding path across the snow, a testament to movement, persistence, connection. The drifts were still high, the world still vast and unyielding, but each mark we left in the snow felt like proof that we were here, alive, enduring. Inside, the fire crackled more brightly than before. Mother poured tea into thick mugs. Father recounted his morning, describing every small detail of the walk, the snow clinging to tree branches, the shimmering ice on the fence posts, quiet beauty of a world reborn under winter's grip. I curled in my blanket, listened to the story and watched the flames, feeling the slow, steady heartbeat of life returning, one careful step at a time. By the following day, it became clear just how much the storm had changed everything. The valley outside our home had been transformed. A silent, snowed-minus world. Fields, roads, and fences were hidden beneath towering drifts. Familiar landmarks of our neighborhood had vanished. Even the church steeple in the distance was reduced to a small, ghostly spike poking above the snow. Father spent the morning surveying the land, peering over drifts and mapping out paths we could follow safely. Each movement was careful, deliberate. One wrong step could leave you trapped or lost. I trailed behind him, gripping my scarf tightly, feeling the cold bite at my cheeks, listening to the rhythm of snow crunching beneath our boots. Mother stayed near the house, preparing meals and tending the fire, her hands busy, but her mind quiet, always glancing outside to track our progress. The warmth inside was comforting, but it also highlighted the isolation the storm had left behind. The world had become both beautiful and threatening, a vast, frozen expanse that seemed to hold its own secrets beneath the surface. As the day wore on, the wind picked up again, soft and teasing rather than furious. Snowflakes drifted down lazily, settling on the roof and window ledges. The light changed subtly with each passing hour, painting the snow in shades of pink, gold, and pale blue. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic, slightly disorienting, as though the world itself had slowed time to a gentle crawl. Father returned mid-minus afternoon, exhausted but triumphant. He had cleared a small path to the barn and checked on the animals. Even the chickens, half-minus buried in snow, had survived. He brought small bundles of straw inside to keep them warm. He explained how they would huddle together, sharing body heat to survive the relentless cold. We spent the rest of the day tending to small details, melting snow for water, stacking firewood, preparing simple meals. Each act, though mundane, felt monumental in this transformed world. Every small comfort was a victory. A warm bowl of soup, a flicker of the lantern, the steady hum of the stove, a victory against the vast, cold silence outside. That night, I lay beneath my blankets and pressed my face close to the window. The snow glimmered under the moonlight, unbroken and endless. I could just make out the faint footprints we had left that morning, pointing across the frozen landscape like threads, connecting us to the world beyond our house. The wind whispered softly, carrying the faint scent of pine and ice, and I drifted into sleep, knowing that despite the storm's fury, life persisted. The snow had reshaped the world, but it could not erase the warmth we carried inside. The next morning, the sky was a pale, cold blue, the kind that seems endless and silent. Father decided it was time for a longer walk, to see what lay beyond the edges of our property, to check that no one nearby was an urgent need. Mother wrapped me in layers of wool, tucking scarves around my neck and head. She made sure my mittens were secure. The air was crisp. Each breath came out in soft clouds that hung briefly before dissipating. We stepped into the snow. The familiar crunch of our boots beneath the drifts was oddly comforting. The world beyond the yard felt transformed. Each tree, each fence post, each mound of snow became part of a larger, endless landscape. silent yet full of life. Father carved a path with his shovel. I followed carefully, my small feet slipping occasionally into hidden pockets of soft snow. The wind whispered through the trees, a low hum that reminded me of lullabies. Soothing, steady, unbroken. We came across a drift that rose higher than Father's head. He paused, scanning the horizon, then motioned for me to climb carefully. Step by step, we worked our way to the top. From there, the world opened like a painting. Rooftops of neighboring houses were barely visible. Fields stretched endlessly. Forests beyond glittered under a coat of ice. Look there, Father said, pointing. Everything's buried, but life's still here. We continued walking, passing a small creek that had frozen solid, its surface smooth like glass. I knelt down and touched it with my mitten. The ice was cold and firm, but beneath it, I could see water still moving. Trapped, but persistent. Thought gave me the quiet thrill. Even under the storm's grip, the world kept its secrets and its motion. After a while, Father stopped near a cluster of trees. We took a break. He handed me a small piece of bread and a bit of cheese. We sat together, watching the wind lift snowflakes from the drifts in slow spirals. Each one glimmered, catching sunlight in a fleeting sparkle. The forest settling quietly back into the white expanse. When we finally turned homeward, our footprints traced a winding path across the frozen land, a gentle reminder that we had ventured out, marking our presence in the vast, quiet world. Inside, the warmth of the stove felt even more precious. Mother had prepared a simple soup that filled the house with a comforting scent. I ate slowly, my mind lingering on the shapes of snowdrifts, the sparkling ice, the vast, hushed landscape that lay beyond our small home. That night, I slept with the memory of the first long walk tucked close to me, a reminder that even in a frozen world, movement, courage, and wonder could still exist. Morning arrived with an almost sacred stillness. The sky was pale, sunlight scattered across the snow, softening the jagged edges of the drifts that now dominated the valley. It felt as if the storm had paused. Not just the world, but time itself. Every sound was amplified in the silence. The crunch of boots, the creak of a tree branch, even the whisper of the wind, painting the frozen landscape with subtle music. Father decided we should explore a little further down the valley. He wanted to see if the stream that ran past our property had frozen completely, and to check on a small grove of trees marking the boundary with Mr. Landry's farm. Mother packed a thermos of tea and wrapped extra blankets around me. Be careful, she said. Her eyes lingered with quiet concern. Stay where your father can see you. The snow rose in endless mounds. Each step required careful lifting of feet to avoid hidden pockets of soft powder. The valley stretched out before us like a wide, frozen ocean, shimmering under the weak winter sun. Shadows from the low hill stretched across the wide expanse, creating gentle waves that shifted as we moved. We reached the stream. It had indeed frozen solid, its surface gleaming like polished silver. Father tapped it lightly with a stick. It rang with a delicate, hollow sound. Beneath the ice, the water still moved, silent, unseen, but alive. I ran my mitten along the surface, feeling the cold pulse beneath, a hidden heartbeat in the frozen world. As we continued toward the grove, the wind picked up. Not harshly, but enough to lift snow in tiny, sparkling spirals. It swirled around us, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant smoke from a neighbor's chimney. The world felt enormous and quiet, a place where even small movements echoed across the valley. Father paused often, pointing out details I might have missed, the delicate patterns etched in frost on every branch, the way sunlight refracted through icicles hanging from a roof, the soft crunch of snow under a bird's footstep. Even in the stillness, life persisted in quiet, fragile forms. By late afternoon, we turned homeward. The path we had carved across the valley stood out clearly against the white expanse, a gentle ribbon that traced our journey. Each step carried a sense of purpose, small but meaningful, as if marking proof that we had survived, explored, witnessed the strange beauty of the storm's aftermath. That evening, As the house filled with the warm glow of the fire, Mother served soup and bread. Sat close, my hands warming over the bowl. I listened to the wind sighing against the walls. The valley outside was silent, but inside, our small household hummed with life, comfort, and the quiet strength of enduring together. Following morning, the air was crisp and clear, the kind of cold that makes your cheeks tingle, and your lungs feel sharp with every breath. Father decided to take me across the fields behind our house. He said we needed to check the fences, make sure the animals had access to food once the snow melted a little. Though the storm had left everything buried under a soft white blanket, we stepped into the snow, boots sinking deep into the powder. Each footprint left a temporary mark, soon softened by tiny swirls of wind lifting the surface like invisible brushes. The field stretched endlessly, uniform and silent. Only occasional trees broke the horizon. The snow sparkled in the weak sunlight, each crystal catching the light like a tiny jewel. Father moved carefully, testing the drifts with his shovel. "Some of these are deeper than they look," he said, his voice low and steady. I followed, trying to imitate his cautious movements. The cold nipped at my nose. My mittens grew damp from holding the shovel. But there was something exhilarating about moving through a world transformed so completely. We reached the fence that bordered the northern edge of the property. Most of it was hidden, the posts barely visible above the drifts. Father climbed over the highest mound, peering down the line to see where the snow had piled too high. From that vantage point, the landscape looked like a quiet sea of white, broken only by the black shadows of distant trees. I trudged up behind him, feeling the weight of the snow and the quiet enormity of the world around me. The wind brushed my hair, whispering across the fields, carrying a faint scent of pine and cold earth, buried beneath the frost. Each gust lifted tiny motes of ice into the air, sparking and swirling before settling again. After inspecting the fence, Father showed me how to create small channels for the animals' food. We worked slowly, shaping paths and clearing snow with careful strokes. It was exhausting, but there was a meditative rhythm to it. The repetition, the quiet, the feeling that we were aiming the snow just enough to survive. At late afternoon, we returned home, exhausted but satisfied. Our prints left a winding trail across the fields, a testament to our small acts of persistence. The house welcomed us back, warm and inviting, with the smell of stew already filling the air. Mother smiled at our return, her hands busy with chores, her eyes soft with relief. That night, as I drifted under layers of blankets, I thought of the fields, the sparkling snow, and the quiet strength it took to move through a frozen world. The storm had changed everything, but the land, the animals, and we ourselves would endure. The next morning, a gentle wind rustled through the pines bordering our property, and like the fierce gusts during the storm, this breeze was soft and curious, lifting snow from the branches in tiny, sparkling clouds that danced slowly to the ground. Father suggested we take a walk toward the small forested ridge to the east, just a short trek to see how the trees had fared, and to enjoy the quiet beauty after days of isolation. Mother bundled me tightly, tucking scarves around my face and neck. The cold was sharp but invigorating, each breath like silver fire in my chest. We stepped outside, the snow crisp beneath our boots, the crunch of every step echoing in the stillness. The world felt immense and silent, almost as if the valley itself was holding its breath, waiting for the first signs of spring. As we approached the ridge, the pines came into view, their branches bowed under the weight of snow and ice. Sickles glimmered in the weak morning sun, long and delicate, like frozen ears caught mid-minus fall. The wind moved through the trees, lifting the snow in slow spirals that sparkled like drifting diamonds. It was mesmerizing, a quiet, hypnotic ballet of frost and light. Father stopped at the edge of the forest and gestured for me to look closer. "See how the pines sway, even under all that weight," he said softly. "They bend, but they don't break. There's strength in that, just like in us." I watched as a small branch, heavy with snow, arched gracefully, then released a shower of powder that drifted gently to the ground. A few tiny birds darted between the trunks, their feathers puffed against the cold. Their bright calls sounded sharp and hopeful in the silence. a reminder that life persisted quietly but insistently. We wandered slowly among the trees, exploring small clearings and following narrow animal tracks preserved in the snow. Every step revealed new wonders. Frost crystals forming delicate patterns on bark, a faint glimmer of frozen sap, tiny footprints of rabbits and squirrels crisscrossing our path. The forest felt alive, whispering its secrets in a language only the patient could hear. By midday, we returned home, our cheeks pink and hearts warmed by the walk. The house smelled of fresh bread. Heather's gentle voice called us in. Inside, the fire crackled. The lantern flickered warmly on the table. We ate slowly, savoring each bite. While outside, the pines continued their quiet dance, bending under the snow, but refusing to break. That night, I lay in bed thinking of the forest, the tiny birds, and the quiet strength of the trees. Even in a world frozen and changed, life endured, bending, shimmering, whispering its resilience into the still air. Days passed. The air began to carry a subtle change. The cold remained sharp, but there was a softness beneath it, a hint that the world was slowly waking from the blizzard's grip. Father noticed the first signs of thaw, a small trickle of water along the edge of the frozen creek, ice beginning to melt, tiny rivulets forming along the fence posts. We spent the morning preparing for this slow awakening. Father cleared the paths to the barn and the chicken coop again, careful to ensure the animals would have access once the snow softened. I helped by carrying small buckets of water from the melting ice. Each one left a damp trail behind me. The sun glinted off the snow, creating dazzling sparks that danced across the drifts with each movement of our bodies. Mother joined us briefly, carrying a small basket of bread to leave for the neighbors. Even in thaw, we must still be cautious, she said. Her eyes scanned the horizon for sudden drifts or soft patches that could swallow a footstep. Her voice was calm but carried a gentle authority, a reminder that winter still held its dangers even as its offend. As we worked, I noticed changes in the landscape that had seemed frozen forever. Sickles hanging from roofs had begun to drip, tiny beads of water falling into soft piles of snow below. Snow on branches sagged slightly, then straightened again as it gradually slid off. The sound was subtle but continuous, a gentle pattering, the music of returning warmth. Father paused to look out over the valley. Look there, he said, pointing to a distant hill. See the dark patches? That's the earth peeking through. Spring will follow if we are patient. I stared at the valley, noticing for the first time the textures beneath the snow, rough edges of fences, the dark glint of soil in patches, the delicate shapes of frost-laden branches beginning to release their icy grip. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to reveal itself in slow, careful increments. When we returned home, Mother had set out the kettle for tea. The smell of warm bread and brewing tea mingled with the cool air, creating a comforting cocoon inside the house. We sat near the stove, exhausted but content, feeling the warmth seep slowly into our child bodies. As night fell, the moon cast a pale glow on the snow. It was a soothing rhythm, almost like a lullaby for the frozen land. Lying beneath my blankets, I felt a sense of quiet hope. The storm had passed, and the world was beginning to breathe again, slowly but surely. The following morning, Father decided to take me on a walk to the creek. The thaw had advanced, but parts were still covered with ice, glinting under the soft winter sunlight. The contrast between frozen and flowing water fascinated me, a reminder that even in the coldest winter, life and motion endured beneath the surface. We walked carefully along its edge, boots crunching in the softened snow. The edges of the creek were dotted with tiny rivulets of meltwater, each one glimmering like a thread of silver. Father knelt beside one of the streams, tapping the ice lightly. See how it moves underneath, he said. Even when the surface seems still, life keeps flowing. I peered through a thin patch of ice, watched the water ripple faintly beneath. Tiny bubbles and shadows shifted, giving the impression of hidden currents and secret worlds moving silently under the frozen layer. The sound was subtle, a soft gurgle, almost like a whispered sigh, calming and steady. Along the banks, small animal tracks crisscrossed the snow. Rabbit prints, deer hoof marks, the cautious steps of foxes. Each trail told a story of survival, of creatures navigating the frozen landscape with patience and skill. I traced some of the prints with my mitten, marveling at the intricacy of the tiny paths. Father and I followed the creek a short distance, noticing the edges of ice lifting slightly in places, revealing dark water beneath. Sunlight reflected on the wet patches, scattering rainbows across the snow. The beauty was quiet and understated, a gentle reminder of the rhythm of nature and the persistence of life, even under winter's weight. By afternoon, we returned home, cheeks flushed from the cold, hearts warmed by the simple wonders we had witnessed. Mother had prepared warm tea and bread. The cozy house smelled of comfort and home. We lingered near the fire, letting its warmth soak into our child bodies, reflecting on the quiet miracles we had witnessed in the flowing water. That night, as I lay beneath my blankets, I imagined the creek winding endlessly through the valley, carrying life and hope beneath its glimmering surface. Even after the harshest winter, the pulse of the world endured, patient, steady. The next morning, a new texture appeared on the window glass. Not frost, but a delicate tersire of melted paths, tiny rivers etched by the sun's tentative warmth. I pressed a finger against the cold pane. The ice was retreating, leaving behind a map of its disappearance. Father stood beside me, coffee steaming in his hands. Thaw's working its way in, he said quietly, bit by bit. Outside, the world seemed to be softening at the edges. The sharp, blinding whiteness of the snow was giving way to a muted, damp sheen. Shadows pooled in the hollows, blue and deep. Mother called us to the table. He had warmed the last of the apples from the cellar. Their sweet spice then cut through the chill. We ate in a comfortable silence, broken only by the ticking clock and the distant, persistent drip from the eaves. After breakfast, Father fetched his tools. "We'll clear the south-facing side of the house today," he announced. "Let the sun do its work." I followed him out. The air no longer bit with the same ferocity. It was cold, yes, but a bearable cold, a cold that spoke of change rather than permanence. We worked side by side, shoveling the heavy, wet snow away from the foundation. Each shovel FUL was heavier than the last, saturated with meltwater. My arms ached, but it was a good ache, an ache of purpose. Father showed me how to channel the runoff away from the house, carving little gullies in the snow so the water would flow toward the garden. "Water always finds the path of least resistance," he explained. "We're just giving it a helpful nudge." By mid-morning, a patch of dark, wet earth was visible against the white. It looked almost black, rich and promising. A single, brave earthworm had surfaced, wriggling in the unexpected light. I crouched to look at it, a tiny, pink signal of life in the vast, sleeping world. Father saw it too and smiled. "See," he said, "nothing ever really stops." We continued our work. The sun climbed higher, gaining strength. Its warmth on the back of my neck was a forgotten pleasure. Birds began to appear in greater numbers. Sparrows and juncos hopped along the cleared path, pecking at invisible seeds. Their chirps were no longer lonely calls, but a scattered, cheerful conversation. Mother brought us mugs of broth at noon. We sat on the porch steps, steam rising from the cups into the cool air. She looked out over the yard, her eyes thoughtful. "The silence is different now," she said. "It's not the silence of waiting. It's the silence of things beginning." I listened. He was right. The heavy, suffocating quiet of the blizzard was gone. In its place was a lighter, more porous silence, unfilled with small, living sounds, dripping water, bird calls, the creak of settling snow. In the afternoon, we ventured further. Father wanted to check on a stand of young birch trees at the property line. They were particularly vulnerable to heavy snow. The path was easier now. Our previous walks had packed the snow down, and the thaw had firmed it into a navigable trail. The birch trees stood in a small cluster. Their white bark was stark against the graying snow. Some of the smaller ones were bent nearly double, but none had snapped. Father gently brushed snow from their slender trunks. "They're flexible," he said, more to himself than to me. "Youth bends. It's the old, rigid things that break." He took a coil of rope from his pack and showed me how to loosely tie the worst minus off sapling to a sturdier neighbor. Not too tight, just enough to remind it to stand up straight. It'll find its own strength again when the weight's gone. Yak felt deeply kind, a small assistance to the struggling world. On our way back, we found the first wildflower, a tiny frozen violet, its purple head just peeking from a south-facing bank where the snow had melted completely. It was wilted and frost-burned, but unmistakably alive. Father knelt beside it. He didn't peck it, just looked. "A promise," he whispered. I returned home as the long, golden light of late afternoon stretched across the valley. The house looked solid and warm. Smoke curled from the chimney in a steady, gray line. That night, after a supper of beans and the last of the salted pork, we sat by the fire. Father didn't tell stories of the storm. Instead, he talked about the garden we would plant, the peas that would go in first, as soon as the ground was workable, the tomatoes hed start from seed on the windowsill. Sister, I had heard plans for marigolds to keep the pests away. Their words wove a tapestry of color and growth in the dim room, a future built on the bonds of the frozen past. I fell asleep not to the howl of wind, but to the soft murmur of their planning, dreaming not of endless white, but of green shoots and the hum of bees. The dawn that followed was pearlescent. A high, thin mist hung in the valley, turning the world into a watercolor, grays, blues, and the faintest hint of gold where the sun tried to break through. Father decided it was a good day for a different kind of exploration. "Let's follow the water," he said. "See where all this melting is going." We put on our least-worn boots as the paths were becoming muddy. The familiar crunch of snow was replaced by a softer, wetter sound, a squelch and a sock with each step. We started at the creek, which was now a proper stream. Its voice was louder, a steady chuckle over stones no longer sheathed in ice. We walked alongside it, following its course downhill. Further we went, the more signs of the thaw we saw. Small tributaries joined the main flow, each contributing its own song. Patches of bare ground appeared, covered in a mat of soggy, brown leaves from the autumn past. The smell was profound, damp earth, decaying vegetation. The deep, fecund scent of the world waking up was a smell that spoke of processes too slow for the eye to see. Transformation and renewal. We came to a place where the stream widened into a small pool, dammed by a fallen log. The water was clear and still. In its depths, I saw movement. Tiny, dark shapes darted among the water weeds. "Salamander larvae," Father said, peering in. "Or maybe tiny frogs. Life doesn't just wait on the land. It's everywhere, even under the water, especially under the water." We sat on a dry, mossy rock and shared a piece of cornbread Mother had packed. Watching the pool, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had been a violent interruption, but this the slow seep of water, the secret life in the pond. This was the world's true rhythm, older and more powerful than any blizzard. On the way back, we took a higher path. From the ridge, we could see the whole valley laid out beneath the mist. It was no longer a monolithic white. It was a patchwork. White snow, gray meltwater, black earth, brown rays. The landscape was coming back into focus, regaining its details. Hella was returning to the world. Father put a hand on my shoulder. "Remember this view," he said. "Remember how it looked when it was all white, and remember how it looks now. Nothing stays the same. The terrible things don't last, and neither do the beautiful ones. But there's always something new coming to take their place." His words settled in me like stones in a pocket, solid, comforting in their weight. That evening, the mist burned away, revealing a sky streaked with lavender and rose. The first bats flitted erratically above the barn, hunting the early insects drawn out by the warmth. We sat on the porch for a while, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars appear one by one. No one spoke. Shared silence was full and complete. Later in bed, I replayed the day, the chuckling stream, the darting shadows in the pool, the patchwork valley, and Father's words. For the first time, I understood that survival wasn't just about enduring the storm. It was about paying attention to what came after, about noticing the return. The next few days were a lesson in subtlety. The changes were no longer dramatic. They were incremental. A little more bare ground each morning, a little less ice on the north side of the house. The snow banks shrunk, settling into themselves, becoming grainy and crystalline at their bases. The soundscape of the farm changed too. The dripping became a constant, quiet percussion. The wind, when it blew, carried the rich smell of mud and new growth. One afternoon, Father took me to the woodlot. We needed to check on the winter's fallen timber and see what could be salvaged for next year's firewood. The forest floor was a chaotic mix of snow, mud, and dead leaves. But here, the signs of life were the most vigorous. Bright green moss coated the north sides of every tree and rock. Fungi like small, leathery shelves clung to fallen logs. And everywhere, there were tracks. Not just the cautious prints of survival, but the purposeful trails of animals going about their business. Deer had browsed on the tender tips of low branches. A porcupine had left a trail of stripped bark. A fox prints led straight to a hollow log den. We moved quietly, respectfully. We were visitors in a world that was busily rebuilding itself. Father pointed to a squirrel's nest high in an oak. "It's not just us," he said. "Every one is preparing. Every one is looking ahead. We found a good minus-sized maple that had come down in the storm. Its trunk was sound." Father set to work with his axe, the clean thwock of the blade echoing in the still air. I gathered the smaller branches, piling them for kindling. The work was physical and satisfying. It felt connected to a long chain of necessity: tree, storm, fire, warmth. By the time we had a decent pile, the sun was slanting through the trees in long, golden bars. We loaded the sled and began the slow pull home. Our path was now a well-worn track of mud and mashed snow, a permanent artery connecting our house to the wider world. That night, the fire we built with the new wood seemed to burn brighter, hotter. There was a symbolism in it we all felt but didn't name. We were burning the remains of the storm itself for our comfort, transforming its destructive power into sustaining heat. Then came the morning of the great melt. A warm wind blew in from the south overnight. A chinook, Father called it. When I stepped outside, the world was awash in sound. It was the music of dissolution, a symphony of drips, trickles, gurgles, and rivulets. Water ran everywhere. It cheated down the roof. It carved miniature canyons on the snow banks. It gathered in sudden, sparkling streams that raced across the yard. The air itself felt warm and damp, almost spring-like. The remaining snow was retreating so quickly you could almost watch it shrink. Father stood on the porch, a broad smile on his face. "Come, well, see some action," he said. We spent the day not working, but observing. It was too wet to do much else. We watched as a small lake formed in the low part of the pasture. We watched the creek swell, its banks nearly overflowing. We watched the last great fortress of a snowdrift by the barn slowly collapse in on itself, like a dying beast. It was a day of surrender, the final, rapid relinquishing of winter's grip. By evening, the yard was a quagmire, but the skeleton of the land was visible again. The fences, stone walls, the shape of the garden beds. The world had returned to its familiar form, the washed clean and dripping. We ate a simple supper, all of us tired from the sheer sensory overload of the day. Later, as I tried to sleep, the sound of running water was a constant roar in my ears. It was the sound of the past being carried away, grain by grain, drop by drop. The following day was one of assessment. The sun returned, strong and bright. The mud began to dry in patches. Father and I put on our tall rubber boots and did a circuit of the property. We checked for damage. A section of fence needed straightening where the weight of snow had pushed it over. Huge shingles had been torn from the barn roof. But overall, the toll was light. We had weathered it. The land had weathered it. We ended up with a garden. It was a sorry sight. Pain, a rectangle littered with the debris of winter, broken stalks, matted leaves, a few scattered, rotten vegetables. But when Father pushed a stick into the earth, it sank deep with little resistance. The ground was soft, unfrozen. Perfect, he said. We'll turn this over in a week or so. His words held no regret for what was lost, only anticipation for what was to come. On our way back to the house, we passed the old lilac bush by the kitchen door, and there on a south-facing branch were the buds. Tiny, hard, green fists clenched tight, but they're the first definitive sign of the future. Mother saw them too when she came out to call us in. She touched one gently with her fingertip. Then she looked at Father, and they shared a smile that was decades old. A smile that had seen many winters end. That night, the air coming through my open window no longer carried a chill. It carried the smell of wet soil and possibility. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the peepers' tiny frogs in the distant pond beginning their first, tentative chorus. It was a thin, reedy sound, but it was a sound of relentless, indomitable life. It was the sound of the world insisting on itself. And as I finally drifted off, I knew the storm was truly over. Not just the weather, but the state of mind, the fear, the waiting, the isolation. We had passed through the wait and come out the other side, into the mud, into the mess, into the glorious, uncertain, burgeoning beginning of everything that comes after. The morning after the great melt dawned with a clarity that fell turned. A high, hard blue sky stretched from her eyes into her eyes, then scrubbed clean by the wind. The world was wet and gleaming, every surface jeweled with leftover droplets. The frantic rush of water had subsided into a steady, purposeful seep. Father stood on the porch, inhaling deeply. "Smell that?" he said. Earth waking up. It was a deep, complicated smell. Wet stone, thawed wood, and beneath it all the sharp, green scent of things preparing to grow. We spent the day on repairs. The mood was different now, lighter. There was no urgency born of desperation, only the steady rhythm of maintenance. We righted the fence post, tamping the soft earth around its base. We nailed the stray shingles back onto the barn roof, the hammer blows ringing out clear in the still air. Each task felt like a stitch, closing a wound the winter had left. Mother worked in the kitchen with the door propped open. The smells of baking bread and simmering soup drifted out, mingling with the outdoor smells. They didn't clash. They blended. The warmth of the hearth meeting the promise of the field. In the afternoon, we walked the perimeter of the pasture. The ground was spongy underfoot. Here and there, pale green spears of grass had pierced the mat of brown. They were feeble, almost translucent, but they pointed defiantly toward the sun. Sheep from the neighboring farm had been let out. They dotted a distant hillside like slow moving clouds, their bleats carrying on the thin air. Their very presence was a declaration. Life was resuming its ordinary, precious business. On the patch of ground where the snow had lingered in a deep shadow, it was now an island of white in a sea of mud. At its edge, where meltwater pooled, a swarm of insects danced in a shimmering calm. They were tiny, mindless, and brilliant, a feast for the returning buds. Father watched them for a long moment. "See," he said, his voice low, "nothing is wasted. The cold stores things up. The frost sets the table." His words painted a picture of a vast, patient economy. Death funding life. Winter financing spring. On the walk back, I noticed the colors. They were no longer just the black of earth and the white of snow. There was the silver gray of lichen on stone, the rusty orange of dead fern, the purple browns of oak leaves clinging to their branches. The world was reclaiming its palette. That evening, we ate at the kitchen table with the window open. Emma, fooled by the lamplight, batted softly against the screen. No one shooed it away. Its persistent tapping was just another part of the night's music. Father talked about plowing, about borrowing Mr. Landry's harrow. Mother mentioned the seed catalog she would pore over. Their conversation was no longer a bulwark against fear. It was a blueprint for a future they fully expected to build. Fell asleep to the sound of that moth, and to the deeper, faster sound of the peepers in the swamp, their chorus now confident, a pulsing anthem in the dark. The next day was for reconnection. The dirt road leading to town was passable, if muddy. Father hitched the horse to the wagon. Mother packed a basket with eggs and a loaf of her bread. We were going to see what was left of the world beyond our valley. The ride was a revelation. The landscape unfolded like a story we had forgotten. Fields lay fallow and wet, but they were fields again, not snow-minus plains. Farms stood solid, smoke rising from their chimneys. We saw people, men repairing roofs, women hanging wash on lines that sagged with the weight of wet clothing, children splashing in mud puddles with a delight that was infectious. Everyone waved. The waves were not just greetings. They were affirmations. I am here. You're here. We made it. In town, the damage was more visible. A large gem had fallen across the mercantile's porch, and we're sawing it into firewood right there on the street. The church bell minister stood firm, but the clapper's rope was frayed. Yet the town was bustling. There was a sense of shared purpose, of communal cleaning up. It felt less like destruction and more like a necessary, if difficult, pruning. We delivered our eggs to the general store. The proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, had deep circles under his eyes but a firm handshake. He took the bread like it was gold. Your mother's starters survived then? He asked. Best news I've heard all week. It struck me then. It wasn't just people and animals that had needed to endure. It was knowledge. Recipes. Skills. The starter for the bread was a living thread, passed from one generation to the next. Its survival was a victory as meaningful as any. On the way home, we took the longer route, past the schoolhouse. It was closed, of course, but someone had cleared the walk. A simple, thoughtful act. It spoke of a faith that children would soon be tromping down it again, their shouts shattering the quiet. The sun was setting as we turned into our own lane. The house welcomed us, its windows glowing amber against the deepening blue. We were tired, but it was a good tired. The tiredness that comes from rain centering the stream of life. That night, Mother didn't hum. She sang a quiet, old song about planting and harvest. Her voice was a thread stitching the peaceful present to a hopeful future. In the days that followed, the pace of change slowed, but its direction was unwavering. The mud firmed, paths dried into hardness. The air lost its raw edge and took on a soft, vegetative quality. Father began the garden in earnest. He turned the earth with a spade, the metal slipping into the dark soil with a sound like a satisfied sigh. The clods he turned over were full of worms, gleaming and purposeful. I followed behind, breaking the bigger clumps with my hands. The soil was cool and crumbly. It held the memory of last year's, growth and the promise of the next. He planted nothing yet. We were simply preparing the bed, making a welcome. It was holy work. One afternoon, a flock of robins descended on the yard. They strutted across the damp grass, cocking their heads, listening for worms. The red breasts were like scattered coals against the green. They were not just passing through, they were moving in, claiming territory. Their cheerful, caroling song was the soundtrack of our labor. Spring was no longer a concept. It was a reality. A busy, noisy, insistent reality. Evenings were for planning. The seed catalogs were spread across the kitchen table, their pages garish with impossible vegetables and impossibly bright flowers. We argued good-naturedly over what to plant. Father was practical potatoes, beans, carrots. Mother insisted on flowers for the table and herbs for flavor. I was allowed to pick one packet of anything I wanted. I chose sunflowers, towens, the kind that would tower over me by summer's end. A promise of grandeur. The act of choosing felt powerful. It was a vote for a specific, colorful future. We were no longer at the mercy of the elements. We were conspiring with them. Then came the morning of the first true warmth. I woke to a sun that had real heat in it. a sun that drew the smell of damp earth and new grass right up through the open window. I dressed and went outside without a jacket. The air felt like a bomb. Father was already in the garden, marking rows with string and sticks. He looked up and smiled. "Today's the day," he said. We planted the peas. The seeds were inkled and hard, little arcs of potential. We pressed them into the warm soil, covered them gently. It felt like a secret. We were burying tiny, silent promises. All afternoon we worked. The lettuce, the radishes, the long or inch needles of carrot seeds. Mother brought out the tiny seedlings she had started indoors on the windowsill. Tomatoes, peppers, they looked so fragile, their stems like green thread. Planted them with extra care, mounding the earth around their bases like a blanket. By the time we finished, the garden was a neat geometry of hope. Rows of bare soil, waiting. It didn't look like much, but to us it was a masterpiece. That evening, we sat on the back steps, too tired to go inside. The sky turned peach, then lavender. The peepers started up, their sound now a thick, joyous blanket over the fields. A bat swooped low, catching the first of the night insects. From the woods, we heard the tentative hoot of an owl. The shift was complete. The silence of winter had been utterly rooted, replaced by a complex, layered world of sound and sign. We were no longer separate from that world. We were participants. Our planted seeds were our contribution to the chorus. As darkness finally settled, the first fireflies emerged. They sparked over the wet grass, little lanterns checking to see if the coast was clear. Her light was intermittent, mysterious, a different kind of signal than the steady flame of our storm-minus lantern. This was a light for peace, for abundance, for the long, gentle stretch of summer nights to come. I caught one in my cupped hands. I felt its tiny, frantic tickle against my palms. Then I opened my hands and let it go. Its zigzagged upward, its light blinking on until it vanished into the velvet dark. Father put his arm around my shoulders. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We sat there in the warm, humming dark for a long time, watching the fireflies, listening to the frogs, breathing in the rich, living scent of our own cared minus for piece of earth. The memory of the howling wind, the blinding white, the consuming cold, it was still there. It was no longer the present. It was a story now, a chapter in the long book of this land and of our lives in it. The storm had been an ending. This soft, noisy, fragrant night was a beginning, and we were here for it, alive, awake, and finally unafraid, filled with gentle promise. A week of soft rain followed, not a punishing deluge, but a gentle, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into the very soul of the earth. It fell straight down, silver needles against a gray wool sky. There was no wind, just the steady, patient percussion on the roof, the drip from the eaves into growing puddles. We were housebound again, but it was a different kind of confinement. This was not a siege. It was a nurturing, a necessary soaking. From the kitchen window, we watched the garden. The bare, brown rose dark into a rich, fertile black. The tiny seeds we had buried were drinking deeply, swelling in their secret darkness. Father spent his days in the barn, oiling harnesses, sharpening tools. The sounds were of maintenance, not emergency. The rhythmic scrape of the whetstone on the scythe blade, the soft clink of metal rings. He was tuning the instruments of summer. Mother turned to mending. A basket of clothes with worn elbows and frayed hems. Each stitch was a small act of preservation, a refusal to let things unravel. She taught me how to darn a sock, how to weave the thread in a nearly invisible web over the whole. It's not about making it new, she said, her fingers deft and sure. It's about making it whole again, stronger in the broken places. I thought of the fence post we'd righted, the shingles we'd nailed back, the garden we'd replanted. We were all darning in our way, tending the fabric of our world after the great tear of the storm. The rain fostered a deep, indoor quiet, punctuated by comforting, domestic sounds. Hiss of the iron on damp cloth, a bubble of soup on the stove, the rustle of paper as Father studied his almanac. It was a quiet full of purpose, not absence. One afternoon, The rain slackened to a mist. I put on a coat and went out to the porch. The world was muffled, wrapped in gray gauze. The colors were subdued: the dark green of pine, the wet black of bark, the silvery sheen on the grass. But the air was alive with scent. The perfume of soaked earth was overwhelming. It was the smell of potential liquefied, of everything waiting to burst. I saw the first dandelion, a shock of yellow in the damp green by the steps, a perfect, sun-like disk, beaded with rain. It seemed impossibly brave. I didn't pick it. I left it there as a flag, planted by the world itself, declaring that life was not just returning. It was already here, in full, defiant color. When the rain finally stopped, it did so quietly. One moment it was a mist. The next it was just damp air. The clouds shredded, revealing patches of pale, watery blue. And then the sun. It was a diffused, gentle sun, but its warmth was undeniable. It drew steam from the roof shingles, from the fields. The whole valley seemed to be exhaling a visible, grateful breath. The next morning dawned crystal clear. The world had been washed and polished. Every leaf, every blade of grass glittered. The garden, when we went to look, was transformed. Overnight, a fuzz of green had appeared along the rows. Not the brave spears of grass from before, but something finer, more deliberate. The peas had cracked the earth, tiny, green fists bunching through the dark soil. The last was a faint, emerald haze. Life was announcing itself, not with a shout, but with a million whispered declarations. We stood unlocked, not needing to speak. The proof was in the ground. Our faith had been answered. From that day, the pace of life accelerated, driven by the strengthening sun. The willow by the creek unfurled its long, yellow-green tendrils. The maple buds swelled, ready to burst into a haze of red flowers. Birdsong became a constant, complex tapestry. The sober chirps of sparrows were woven with the liquid trill of a red-winged blackbird from the marsh. The percussive knock of a woodpecker in the woods was no longer a celebration of survival. It was the busy, competitive, joyous noise of building. Nests were being woven, territories defended, courtships conducted in mid-minus air. He fell into the rhythm of spring walk. Father plowed the lower field for oats. They walked behind him, picking stones from the fresh turned furrows and adding them to the wall at the edge of the property. Each stone was cool and solid in my hand. I was building something that would last longer than a season. Something the next storm would have to reckon with. Thousands freed from their coop, scratched and clucked in the yard. Their feathers puffed in the sun. They found worms we couldn't see, their heads jerking with mechanical precision. Their contented bustle was its own kind of poetry. One evening, Father didn't come in from the barn at his usual time. Mother sent me to fetch him. I found him not working, but standing still in the open doorway, looking east. The last of the sun gilded the ridges. The first star, Venus, hung like a perfect diamond just above the tree line. He heard my footsteps and spoke without turning. "Your grandfather used to say you could hear the corn grow on a night like this," he said, his voice quiet. "Not really hear it, of course, but you could feel it. The whole world pushing up, reaching for the light." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Listen." I listened. I heard the peepers, the distant lowing of a cow, the sigh of the wind and the new pine needles. But beneath it all, I thought I felt it, a vibration in the earth itself, a vast, silent, upward hum. Thus the sound of the great, green machine of the world engaging its gears. We stood there until the last light faded and the sky turned deep violet, pricked with more stars than I could count. The memory of the blizzard was still with me, the blinding white, the howling isolation. But it was contained now, packed away like a heavy winter coat in a trunk. It was part of our history, but it no longer defined our present. Our present was this soft, star-filled darkness, humming with invisible growth. Our present was the smell of turned earth and apple blossoms from the tree by the fence. Our present was the warm, calloused weight of my father's hand on my shoulder. The final act of the season's turn was not dramatic, but deeply symbolic. On a Saturday, Father hitched the wagon again. This time, we drove not to town, but to the dump at the edge of the woods, a place where broken things went. In the back of the wagon were the remnants of the storm. Oh, shattered panes of glass from the cold frame, the splintered handle of a shovel that had snapped under the weight of ice, the remains of the old, rotten tarp that had covered the wood pile and had been shredded by the wind. We unloaded it all onto the pile of rust and refuse. It looked small and pitiful there, the proud violence of the storm reduced to a heap of trash. Father didn't say anything. He just took one last look, then turned the horse for home. We didn't look back. We were leaving the wreckage behind. That Sunday, we put on our best clothes, still mended, but clean, and went to church. The small white building was full. Sun streamed through the high windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. The minister didn't preach about the storm. He spoke about gratitude for renewal, about the resilience of faith and of the land. He talked about the parable of the sower, and how some seeds fall on good soil. As we sang the final hymn, my voice mingled with the others. A rough, imperfect sound, but full. I looked around at the faces I knew. Mrs. Hargreaves, singing stoutly. Mr. Landry, his head bowed. The Jenkins family, all in a row. We were all here. We had all bent under the same wind, and we had all somehow straightened again. After the service, people lingered in the churchyard, talking not of loss, but of plans, planting dates and new calves and the price of seed corn. Handshakes were firm, smiles were wide and unguarded. Community had not just survived, it had been annealed, made stronger by the shared trial. Walking home, the world seemed to glow with an inner light. The grain was deep, the sky more vast. Everything had been scoured clean, not just by the meltwater, but by the passage through hardship. We were home. The storm was a story we would tell, a marker in time. But remember, Father had said one night by the fire, the land doesn't remember a storm the way we do. It just gets on with growing. And so did we. That evening, I sat on my bed and looked out at the twilight. Fireflies were back. More than their silent, pulsing conversation filled the deepening blue. In the garden, the rows of green were visibly taller than they had been that morning. I could almost see them growing. I thought of the tiny, frozen violet we had found, of the first drip of meltwater, the sound of the church bells ringing across the snow. A chain of small miracles leading to this, to a world saturated with life and light. I knew then that winter would come again. The wind would howl. The snow would fall. But it would never be that winter again. We had passed through its white heart and emerged on the other side. We knew what we were made of. We knew what the land was made of. And that knowledge was a warmth no future cold could ever entirely extinguish. I blew out the candle. In the dark, the pulse of the fireflies blinked on and off. A silent, steadfast code, a promise written in light, repeated again and again, across the whole wide, healed world. The first true warmth of the season settled in like a benevolent guest, overstaking its welcome in the best possible way. It wasn't the fleeting heat of a late winter afternoon. This heat had weight presence. It lay upon the fields and pressed against the sides of the house, a palpable, golden pressure. The world seemed to swell under its influence, though the windows opened wide, and the air that drifted in was no longer just clean. It was flavored, carrying the sweet dust of pollen, the resinous sting of pine sap warming in the sun, the rich perfume of everything green and growing. Inside, the house felt different. It was no longer a fortress, a cave against the cold. It was a vessel, open to the world, letting the season flow through its rooms. The heavy blankets were folded away, the wool socks relegated to a back drawer. Sense of lightness pervaded everything, from the way we moved to the very light in the air. Father's work shifted entirely. The urgency of repair melted away, replaced by the steady, forward-looking rhythm of cultivation. He was in the fields from dawn until the long lavender twilight, his silhouette moving with a patient, unhurried grace. I followed when I could, my smaller tasks dovetailing with his. He was the stone minus picker, the wheat mings puller, the one who carried the water jug out to where he stood, wiping sweat from his brow with a faded bandana. Our conversations were sparse, practical. Hand me that steak. See how the soil clumps there. Needs more tilth. But the silence between us was no longer the tense silence of waiting. It was a companionable quiet, filled with the buzz of insects and the distant, rhythmic scrape of his hoe. One afternoon, he stopped and leaned on his tool, looking not at the neat rows of oats, but at the woods that edged the field. Your granddad always said a farmer plants with one eye on the sky and one ear to the ground, he said. I think he meant you have to listen to the land. It tells you what it needs. He knelt, scooped up a handful of dark earth, and let it sift through his fingers. Right now, it's saying it's ready. Hungry even. He looked at me, his eyes squinted against the sun. That's a good thing to be, ready and hungry. The lesson was not in the words, but in the gesture, in the reverence of the handful of soil. I began to see the land not as a stage for our labor, but as a living partner in a slow, ancient dance. We provided the intention, the seed. It provided the miracle. The garden became my particular domain. Mother had given me a small, sun-drenched corner for my sunflowers. Every morning, I would run out to see them. At first, they were just two pale oval leaves, clinging close to the ground. Then a central stalk began to rise, hairy and vigorous. Each day it was taller, thickening, reaching with a visible, almost arrogant ambition, and measured myself against it. Soon, it was past my knees, then my waist. It was a daily astonishment, this visible record of time and growth. Around its base, I planted marigold seeds from Mother's stash. Keep the bunks respectful, she said. They came up quickly, a cheerful ruff of orange and gold guarding the sunflower's serious ascent. It felt like I was building a tiny kingdom, a small, sun-worshipping citadel of green and gold. Life, I was learning, wasn't just about endurance. It was about this, the deliberate, joyful act of fostering more life. The animals, too, threw off the last vestiges of winter solemnity. The chickens became feathered explorers, ranging farther from the coop, their calves bright red and jaunty. They discovered the compost pile and held loud, ecstatic meetings there, scratching with industrious fervor. One of the barn cats presented us with a litter of kittens and a nest of hay behind the feed bin. They were tiny, blind, mulling things, all paws and oversized heads. You were allowed to look, but not touch. Their mother watched us with wary, green-side pride. New life, fragile and demanding, right under our noses. It was a reminder that the Great Awakening wasn't just out in the fields. It was in the dark corners of the barn, in the secret nests in the eaves. The whole farm was thrumming with it. The evenings were no longer about huddling close to a single heat source. They were for dispersal, for enjoying the expanse. He would eat supper on the porch, the wooden boards still warm from the sun. Food was simpler now, fresh grains from the garden, eggs collected that morning, cold milk. But it tasted of the season itself. Afterwards we would often just sit, Father in his rocking chair, pipe smoke curling into the dusk, Mother mending in the last of the light, and me, sprawled on the steps, watching the sky perform its nightly miracle. Colors were deeper now than in winter, the blues more profound, the oranges and purples richer, as if the world had finally remembered how to dye its own horizons. Fireflies emerged earlier, the constellations more dense. I tried to catch their pattern, but it was a language of randomness, a celebration of chaos. One night, a whippoorwill began calling from the edge of the woods. Its clear triple-noted cry whip-boar-will, whip-boar-will cut through the softer sounds like a sharp, sweet knife. We all fell silent to listen. It called again, closer this time, and then a third time, right from the lilac bush by the porch. It felt like a blessing, a wild, untamed voice announcing that the deep woods, too, were fully awake and claiming the night. Then came the day of the first real harvest. It wasn't the grand harvest of autumn, but a modest, precious beginning. The radishes were ready. Their ruby shoulders pushed proudly from the soil. The other handed me a small basket. "Go carefully," she said. "Twist, don't pull." He knelt in the soft dirt between the rows. The sun was hot on my back. I found a perfect plum radish, its leaves a vibrant green crown. I grasped it at the base, gave a gentle twist, and felt the root release its hold on the earth with a soft, sandy sigh. It came up clean, trailing a single thread of root. I brushed the soil from its luminous red skin. It was cool and firm in my hand. A small, perfect globe of Christmas, conjured from nothing but a seed in time. I filled the basket. That night, we ate them sliced thin on a plate with just a sprinkle of salt. They were pungent, sharp, and incredibly sweet. We ate everyone. It was a meal that tasted of accomplishment, of partnership with the soil. We had not just endured, we had produced. As the days grew long and hotter, the memory of the blizzard didn't vanish. It transformed. It was no longer a source of fear, but a point of reference, a measure of contrast. When the afternoon sun grew oppressive, Father would sometimes pause and say, "Remember how we longed for heat." And we would smile, remembering the deep, penetrating cold that had once seemed eternal. The storm had given us the gift of depth. It had carved valleys of experience in our lives, making the gentle hills of ordinary days feel like peaks of contentment. One Sunday, we took a long walk, not for work but for seeing. We followed the creek all the way to the beaver pond we hadn't visited since the thaw. The world was lush, almost riotous. Ferns uncurled in damp hollows. Wild strawberries dotted the banks with tiny white flowers. The pond itself was a scene of frantic activity. Dragonflies like living needles stitched the air above the water. A great blue heron stood statue minus still in the shallows, then unfolded with impossible grace to spear a fish. Life was not just present, it was layered, complex, competitive, and beautiful. Sat on a sun-warmed rock and shared a wedge of cheese. No one spoke for a long time. The heron finished its meal, gave a harsh croak, and flapped heavily away. In its wake, the pond settled, reflecting the sky and the circling swallows. Father finally broke the silence. He was here all winter, you know. That heron, hunkered down somewhere waiting. Just like us. I looked at the vibrant, buzzing world around me and tried to imagine it silent, white, and still. I couldn't. The past was real. But the present was too vivid, too loud, too green to be overshadowed. The walk home was slow. We were reluctant to leave the water's edge. But, as we crested the last hill and saw our farm laid out below the green fields, the tidy garden, the house resting solidly in its cradle of land, a different kind of peace settled over me. This was our place. Not just where we lived, but what we tended. What had tended us in return. He had passed through the white silence together, and now we were basking in the green noise. The storm was in the past, but the strength it had revealed in us, in the land, in the simple, stubborn fact of life that was present. It was in the sunflower stretching toward the sky, in the taste of a sharp, homegrown radish, in the call of the whippoorwill at dusk. It was the deep, quiet hum at the heart of things, the hum I had felt with my father that starry night. I hum that said we bend, we do not break, and then we grow. Story of the great winter was over, but the story of this spring, this summer, this life, that story was just beginning, word by green. The summer heat arrived not as a guest, but as a sovereign, claiming its throne in a blaze of relentless blue. It pressed down upon the valley, a heavy, shimmering blanket that turned the air to liquid glass. The world became a study in contrasts, the shrill, electric buzz of cicadas in the parched trees against the deep, somnolent silence of noon, the blinding white of the sun on the dusty lane against the cool, velvety black of the barn's interior. Our rhythms changed once more. We rose in the pre-minus dawn charcoal light when the world was still soft and breathable. By the time the sun hauled itself over the eastern ridge, we had already accomplished the day's hardest tasks. The garden required a new kind of vigilance. Not against cold, but against thirst. The soil, so dark and moist in spring, now turned pale and granular, cracking into intricate, desperate maps at the surface. My sunflowers had become giants. Their thick, hairy stalks were as solid as small tree trunks, their broad leaves like green leather. They had long since passed me by, their heavy heads now nodding far above, still following the sun's arc with a slow, stately devotion. Beneath them, the marigolds blazed in defiant, cheerful orange, their pungent smell a sharp note in the herb-scented air. Every evening, as the fierce light began to soften, I would carry water from the pump. The metal handle was almost too hot to touch. The water that emerged was shockingly cold from the deep earth. I would pour it slowly at the base of each plant, watching the greedy soil drink it down in an instant, leaving only a darker stain that vanished within minutes. It felt like a communion. My offering to their towering, silent thirst. Father's work was now one of patient endurance. The oats stood tall and golden, rippling in the occasional hot breeze like an inland sea. He walked the boundaries inspecting, but there was little to do but wait for the exact moment of perfect dryness. His hands, which had swung axes and shovels with such force, now performed delicate tasks. He repaired the woven handles of baskets. He carved a new plug for the rain barrel. His movements were slow, precise, conserving energy. In the deep shade of the porch in the afternoons, he would whittle a block of pine, slowly becoming a bird, its wings smooth under his thumb. He didn't speak much. The heat seemed to have boiled words down to their essentials. Clouds building west, he might say, or simply drought. Why? But his presence was a steady, calm counterpoint to the sun's frantic energy. On such afternoon as I sat shelling peas into a bowl, the steady sea-rich of his knife the only sound, he held up the half-formed bird. See, he said, it was always in there, in the wood. I'm just helping it find its way out. He looked out at the shimmering fields. Lands like that too. Everything it ever needs to be is already in it. The seed, the rain, the sun are just the help. The animals sought their own sanctuaries. The chickens bathed in shady spots under the wagon, their wings spread, kicking up clouds of fine dirt. The barn cats and their now gangly kittens sprawled like liquid fur on the cool stone of the milkhouse floor. Even the bees from the hive in the orchard seemed to fly with a heavier, more drugged hum, moving from blossom to blossom in the linden tree with a slow, pollen-dusted purpose. The world was not sleeping. It was conserving, pulsing at a lower, deeper frequency. The storm's memory now felt like a story from another lifetime. The tale of an ice-bound world that seemed impossible under this molten sky. Yet, the lessons of it were woven into our summer routine. The careful husbandry of water, the appreciation of shade, the knowledge that excess, in any direction too much cold, too much heat required a different kind of resilience. One evening, a dry lightning storm crackled on the horizon. No rain fell on our fields, but the sky was torn by silent, violet flashes, revealing fantastic, towering cloud-castles. We stood on the porch and watched the celestial drama. Mother reached over and took Father's hand. No words passed between them, but the gesture spoke of a shared history, a knowledge of other storms, other threats weathered side by side. The lightning was beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that power lived above us, indifferent to our planted rows and hopeful labors. But we were not afraid as we had been. We watched it with a kind of awe, like spectators at a mighty distant play. The great event of high summer was the haying. It began on a morning when the dew was still heavy enough to silver the grass. Father and Mr. Landry worked together, their scythe swinging in wide, practiced stalks, laying the fragrant grass in neat, green swaths. The sound was a long, whispering sigh. For 2 days it lay curing in the sun, turned once by hand with wooden rakes until it turned the pale gold of old parchment. Then on the 3rd day, the gathering. The heat was intense, a physical weight. It followed behind the wagon, as to king the smaller bundles, my shirt sticking to my back. The air was thick with the sweet, sun-baked smell of timothy and clover, and with a fine, itching chaff that coated our skin and filled our nostrils. It was hard, hot, exhausting work, but there was a profound satisfaction in it. This was the translation of spring's green promise into winter's surety. Each bundled sheaf was a battery of summer sun, stored away against the coming cold. As we stacked the final load in the loft, the barn filled with the dusty, sweet gloom of stored sunlight. Father leaned against the high door, looking down at the stubbled field. Sweat carved clean tracks through the dust on his face. Another winter's voice silenced, he said, and there was triumph in his tired smile. My own private harvest arrived on a morning in late July. I went out to the garden as usual, and there it was. My sunflower had opened. Overnight, the great green bud had unfurled into a massive disc, a full foot across, a radiant sun of its own making. It was a complex, mathematical marvel. Hundreds of tiny, tubular brown florets formed the dark, mysterious heart. Radiating from it in a perfect spiral were the long, bright yellow petals ray flowers. Mother called them each one a lance of pure, captured light. It was so heavy it bowed the mighty stalk, presenting its face to the world with a solemn, glorious gravity. These were already at work, clambering over the central disk, their legs heavy with orange pollen. I stood and stared for a long time. I had planted a seed the size of my fingernail. This was what had been inside it. This arrogant, beautiful, life-minus-giving architecture. It was more than a plant. It was a testament, a monument to patience, to faith and unseen processes. I ran to get Father and Mother. They came and stood with me, looking up at my golden victory. Father put his hand on the thick stalk. Strong, he said approvingly. Mother touched one of the velvety leaves. It's magnificent, she whispered. I didn't say anything. My heart was too full. That sunflower was my blizzard, my long winter, and my triumphant, radiant spring all in one. It was proof that I, too, could help something magnificent find its way out. As August deepened, the heat began to soften at the edges. Mornings held a tentative, unfamiliar Christmas. The light slanted differently, laying longer, kinder shadows. The frantic chorus of the insects began to slow, their song becoming more rhythmic, more nostalgic. We gathered the main harvest tomatoes warm from the vine, beans that snapped with a clean green sound, onions with papery skins that rustled like old letters. The pantry shelves slowly filled with mason jars, each one a captured piece of summer green beans, pickles, stewed tomatoes, their contents glowing like jewels in the cellar's dim light. The work was canning, drying, storing. It was the opposite of planting. Instead of putting things into the earth, we were taking things out, preserving them against the inevitable turn. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like another kind of preparation. A gathering minus a building of another sort of fortress, this one made of flavor and sustenance. One night, a week before school was to start, I was awakened by a sound. Not a worrisome sound. A gentle, pattering whisper on the roof. Rain. A soft, soaking rain, not a thunderous downpour. The first true rain in weeks. I got up and went to the window. The world was a symphony of soft, wet sounds. I could smell it through the screen, the released scent of dust, the grateful exhalation of the parched earth. I stood there for a long time, watching the silver threads catch the light from my window. I thought of the long, white silence, of the howling wind, of the deep, fearful cold. Then I thought of the first drip of meltwater, the first green shoot, the taste of a radish, the weight of a sunflower head, the sweet, dusty smell of hay in the loft. The chain of moments stretched out behind me, each one linked to the next, leading from that frozen night to this gentle rainy one. The storm was not an interruption. It was the first link, the violent, necessary cracking of the shell so the green could get out. I went back to bed and lay listening to the rain. It was a kinder sound than the wind, a forgiving sound. It whispered of full cisterns, of deep roots drinking, of a world decel aching its thirst and preparing for the next turn of the wheel. I fell asleep with the sound in my ears, a peaceful, steady rhythm, a lullaby for a season that was ending, and a promise to the one that slept beneath, waiting for its own time to rise. September arrived not with a bang, but with a slow, golden sigh. The fierceness of the sun was gone, replaced by a mellow, honeyed light that poured over the valley like warmed syrup. It gilded the edges of everything, the turning maple leaves, the dried stalks of corn, the weathered gray boards of the barn. The air lost its oppressive weight and grew clear and luminous, carrying distances in a way the humid summer air never could. Could he recowbell from 2 farms over? The sound arriving sharp and distinct on the crystalline breeze. The world felt expansive, opened up. Our work shifted once more into the graceful, reflective tempo of harvest's end. We gathered the final stubborn vegetables, the last of the tomatoes, blushed and heavy the pumpkins, swelling 2 orange moons in the patch, the hard, blue minus shelled hubbards that would keep in the cellar until deepest winter. The garden, my kingdom of grain, began to look tired and dignified in its dissolution. The bean poles stood like bare teepees. The potato plants yellowed and slumped, their work done underground. Its great head, now bowed with the weight of ripened seeds, had become a landmark for flocks of goldfinches. They clung to its face, pecking with delicate precision, their cheerful potato minus chip calls a constant chatter. I didn't mind their feast. It felt right. The cycle demanded it. I had nurtured the giant, and now it was nurturing the tiny, brilliant birds. Life passing life along. Father's focus turned to the woodlot. The crisp hair was perfect for cutting. The ring of his axe was a clean, percussive note in the autumn stillness, followed by the great, groaning sigh of a tree and the earth-minish, shaking thud of its fall. I helped limb the branches, the sharp, resin-white smell of pine and oak sap filling my head. Hack the logs in neat, shoulder minus high cords along the side of the barn. Each cord was a calculation, a piece of arithmetic against the cold. 4 coins for the cook stove, 6 for the parlor stove, 2 for the worst months. As we worked, the leaves began their final, spectacular performance. It started subtly, a blush of reed in the swamp maple, a gilding of the hickory. Then, almost overnight, it was as if the hills had been set on fire. Crimson, gold, orange, purple-like conflagration of color so intense it seemed to vibrate against the blue sky. We would pause in our work, lean on our tools, and just like it was a beauty that carried the faint, sweet scent of decay beneath its glory. It was the land spending its final energy in a brilliant, defined party before the sleep. One afternoon, we took a wagon up to the high pasture to bring down the last of the hay. The view from the ridge took my breath away. The whole valley was a quilt of color, stitched together with the dark green of pines and the silver threads of streams. Our farm looked small and perfect nestled within it, smoke rising straight up from the chimney in the windless air. Father saw me looking. "Pretty picture, isn't it?" he said. "Doesn't look like a place that could try to kill you." He said it not with bitterness, but with a kind of wondering respect. The land was both provider and challenger, nurturer and test. You couldn't have the breathtaking beauty of this October afternoon without the brutal honesty of the February blizzard. It were 2 sides of the same coin. We loaded the wagon in silence. The only sounds the rustle of the dry hay and the distant caw of crows. The hay was lighter now, bleached and sweet minus smelling. It was the last of the sun's captured energy we would store. Those driving back down, the world seemed hushed, holding its breath. It was the pause between the exhalation of growth and the inhalation of rest. Evenings now had a new ritual. After supper, Mother would light the lamp earlier. Its circle of light felt more necessary, more cherished, as the darkness outside grew deeper and arrived sooner. We would often sit together, not with the frantic mending or planning of other seasons, but with quieter tasks. Father might toil a harness. Mother would knit socks, the needles clicking a soft, steady rhythm. I had homework now, the strange symbols on the page feeling both important and disconnected from the real, scent-minus-filled world of the farm. But the lamplight pulled us together, a warm island in the cooling night. One such evening, Father put down his harness and went to the bookshelf. He took down the heavy family Bible, not to read from it, but to extract something pressed between its pages. It was a dried wildflower, fragile and brown, its purple color almost entirely faded. Ave Islet. He laid it carefully on the table. "Found that the spring after my first bad winter here," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Was about your age. Thought I'd never see anything green again." Then there it was. He looked from the flower to me, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "You found one too this year." I nodded. Remembering the brave spot of yellow by the steps, he carefully slid the brittle violet back into its paper tomb. "Keep one," he said. "Press it in a book. So when the white comes again and you can open it up and remember, the green always comes back. It's the one promise you can count on." It was the closest he ever came to speaking poetically. It was also the most solid truth he'd ever given me. The first frost arrived on a night so still you could hear the stars. I woke to a world transformed once more, but this time into something delicate and glittering. Every blade of grass, every fallen leaf, every fence wire was sheathed in a brittle white fur. The garden was finally, officially over. The marigolds were blackened sculptures. The sunflower head, now picked clean by the birds, was a skeletal, dripping chandelier of ice. But it wasn't a sad sight. It was clean, conclusive. The frost had drawn a final, shimmering line under the season. That day, we pulled up the spent plants, added them to the compost pile. We turned the empty garden soil, exposing the dark earth to the chilling air. "Fool's putting it to bed," Mother said, brushing dirt from her knees. "It needs its rest too." We stood back, looking at the neat, blank rectangle of brown. It looked peaceful. Its work was done. Ours for now was too. The final act was a small, personal one. And the last truly warm afternoon, I took a kitchen knife and went to my sunflower. I sawed through the tough, fibrous stalk. It was harder than I expected, like cutting through rope. Finally, it gave way with a soft crack. I carried the giant head, lighter now but still immense, into the barn. In the dusty, sun-streaked quiet of the loft, beside the sweet smelling hay, I laid it carefully on a sack. I spent an hour picking up the plum pest, stripy seeds from its face, filling a small cloth bag. The rest I left for the mice and the birds. I took my bag of seeds downstairs. Mother had a small clay pot waiting, filled with dry soil. I pushed my seeds into it, not to grow now, but to keep, to hold the potential. I placed the pot on the windowsill in my room, where the weak winter sun would still find it. It was my own version of Father's pressed violet, a tangible promise to myself. Next spring, I would plant these children of my giant. The cycle would begin again, but it would not be the same. I would be different. The soil would be different. But the potential, the stubborn insistence on life, that would be the same. That night, we had the first fire in the parlor stove. It was not the desperate, clinging fire of the blizzard. It was a celebratory fire. A fire of choice, not necessity. We pulled our chairs close. The dry oak logs crackled and spat, filling the room with a dry, woody perfume. Father puffed on his pipe. I looked from the contained, cheerful fury in the iron stove to the black square of the window, and back again. We had tamed a piece of the wild to warm us. We had stored the sun from the hayfield and the woodlot to see us through. We were ready, not with the frantic anxiety of last fall, but with a quiet, hard -1 confidence. The storm was a memory, polished smooth by time, like a river stone. It was no longer sharp enough to cut. It was just part of the landscape of our lives, a dark valley we had passed through, which made the warmth of this hearth, the solidity of these walls, the presence of each other, shine all the brighter. Outside, the cold was gathering its strength. The wind would soon find its voice again. But inside, the fire whispered, and in its whispering, I heard the echo of all the sounds that had brought us here: the drip of meltwater, the crack of the first pea shoot, the rustle of growing corn, the sigh of falling hay, the chatter of goldfinches, the ring of an axe in clear air. It was the story of a year, our year, and as the flames danced, painting moving shadows on the walls, I knew the story wasn't over. It was just turning a page. The next chapter was waiting in the cold, dark ink of the winter night, and in the small brown seeds resting in a pot on my sill. We would read it together, word by patient word, season by steadfast season.